So this is, I'm Glenn Fleischman. I'm the author of Take Control of Untangling Connections, and I'm here to talk to you about what cables can be untangled when you're putting them together. This book is all about how to figure out. I don't know, Joe, you're on the screen there. I'm sorry. Let me. I got to pin myself here. Let me do that first. So the book is all about figuring out what works with what, how to get the best connection from what you have, and how to buy the right cable you need for your purposes, how to determine what you have that works, and what else you can get that'll make it work. And this is in the Take Control book series, and my book is on sale right now at takecontrolbooks.com/untangling for $5. We're going to get into the meat of the subject in a moment, but I wanted to introduce Joe Kissel, who is the publisher of Take Control Books. Joe, you want to introduce yourself here?
Yes. Hi. Maybe you have to unpin yourself for.
I'm going to unpin myself. We'll keep moving. There we go. Joe's now.
What do we know about technology? We only publish books on technology, but what do we know? So yeah. Hi everybody. In case you can't see me, I'm Joe Kissel, Take Control publisher. For those of you who don't know, and probably that's zero of you, we have books on all kinds of tech topics. Some of them are really Apple specific, but a lot of them aren't. And this is one of the ones that is for everybody, because everybody uses USB cables and HDMI cables and Ethernet cables and Thunderbolt cables. So I have a million of them sitting right here on my desk, and Glenn's got a whole bunch in his collection too. And boy, there are a lot of reasons to wonder, what cable should I use for what? So Glenn's going to help us out with some of that today. And of course, as Glenn said, we would also love to sell you a book on it. It's $5 until tomorrow. Then the price goes back up to its regular $10 price. But hey, either way, small price to pay for getting rid of confusion. So
we've got confusion about the day of the week. Sale ends on May 5th, right? May 5th.
Yes.
Pacific.
Yes. It's May 5th. See, I had this thing, like I realized like the number 5 was popping up all over the place. Like I'm 55. And May 1st was the 5th anniversary of me running Take Control Books. So I said, oh, let's have a 5-day sale from 5/1 to 5/5, and let's put some books on sale for $5. So that's what we're doing. Anyway, enough about that. Glenn,
hello.
Solve all of our cable problems, please.
That's great. I will. I'd be happy to. We already have a question in, and I encourage folks to ask questions as we go, because we can be answering questions on the fly. Let me bring myself to the foreground. I've got a special camera that we can switch to. I've got the cable cam. So if when it shows some cables, we're going to switch over here. And in fact, I think I'm actually going to start over here, because the first question was about how to tell the difference between a data and a USB-C cable. How do you differentiate a data and charging USB-C cable? And the answer is, oh my, no. Oh, it's the worst question to ask. I'm sorry, it's the best, but it's the worst for the industry, because as you know, USB-C has this universal connector type. It's it's a very standard thing. It's reversible, very exciting. It's universal. It always fits in a USB-C receptacle. There's no Thunderbolt style, USB style, display style USB-C. It's all one connector with a common set of electrical characteristics. Very exciting, very exciting. And yet, the top problems people have are with folks getting a cable, thinking they know the capabilities of it, and discovering that it doesn't do what they want. So I have a top 3 list. I'll read off the top 3 list, and then I'll show you cables. But remember, keep asking questions in the YouTube chat, and we'll get to those when we're done here. But I'll go through our top 3 cable problems. The first is a Thunderbolt 3 cables that are active cables, and I'll show you one in a second, because those can't deliver USB top speeds. The second are USB-C charging only cables, which are we're going to talk about to answer the question here, right? Is how do you tell them apart? And the third is, Joe, help me this. I've forgotten the third one. These are my top 3. It's a USB-C. Sorry, it's a USB 3 cable with USB-C ends that can't carry Thunderbolt data. So the fastest it can do is Joe has a cable here. Do you want me to let me bring you up? You have one handy? I'll bring up mine in a second here.
Sure.
I think can I show us both at the same time? Let's find out.
I don't know.
Unpin myself.
Which,
No, I think it
sorry,
shows.
which of my cables are you asking for? I was a little bit distracted
Well,
by
here
reading.
I'm gonna bring up my cable cam. Let's switch to the cable cam, and I'll show you what I got here. So there's so the three cables again: Thunderbolt 3 active cable,
Mhm.
a USB 3 only cable, which can't carry Thunderbolt data, only USB 3 data, and a USB-C charging cable, which may
So
carry.
I happen to have a USB-C charging cable right here. This particular cable came with, I don't know, some Apple device. But the only thing that is noteworthy about this is that it has no markings on it.
Oh yeah, this is the thing: is there are cables with no marking. So let me here. I'm going to bring up the cable cam, and we will show you what that's going to look like here. So I've got a set of cables here that demonstrate the range of possibilities, more or less. And I've got one more. Let's see. So I've got a USB 4, USB 3 active, and then oh, that's another USB 4. 1 second. I've got a stack of cables to show more examples as people have them. So USB. The question was about USB-C charging versus data cables. How do you tell the difference between them? And the issue is there's no standard seemingly. So here is here is a cable that has no marking on one side. On the other, it has the brand name. It's Anchor, which makes perfectly good cables. But without any marking, I don't know what this is. And it might be Thunderbolt. It's unlikely because Thunderbolt cables were more expensive. It may be a USB-C charging cable, or it might be a USB 3 cable, but without a marking, I don't know. And Apple is a culprit here because Apple sells a cable that it still ships with some of its MacBooks. That's a USB-C charging only cable. It can do a charge cable, I'm sorry, is what they call it. So it can't do Thunderbolt data, and it can only pass USB 2.0 data, 480 megabits per second. And when you look at it, there's no markings that help you with it. Here's another culprit too, which can be confusing. This isn't a charge issue, but you look at this cable and you see how it says, oops, I'll get it centered there. It says a 3 and a lightning bolt. So we know this is a Thunderbolt cable because of the lightning bolt symbol. We know it's Thunderbolt 3 because the manufacturer, hey, they actually put it on there. And now you may not be able to tell this, but it has a very long cable tip. And I'll compare that to a different cable. It may help if I show the two at once. So on above on your screen, you'll see a similarly marked cable with a 4, and you notice how much shorter that plug end is. Well, the 3 cable I'm holding is an active cable. This allows you to transfer data at longer distances over over Thunderbolt 3 at up to its maximum speed at 40 gigabits per second. But a Thunderbolt 3 cable, an active cable, cannot also carry USB-C data. So you wind up with, or can't carry it faster than 480 megabits per second. So you wind up with a very slow connection. It's very confusing. The ultimate cable that we recommend these days is a USB 4 cable. And you can see this is one from Otherworld Computing. They and many others are now making these cables affordably. A Thunderbolt 4 cable is also fully compatible with USB 4. So if you get a Thunderbolt 4 cable, you don't need to worry about active, passive, charging only, or standards. You can pass the maximum data rate of USB 4, USB 3.2, USB 3.1, and Thunderbolt 3 and 4 over it without any confusion. So that's the rundown on that. And so when you ask, how do I tell which cable, how do I tell if it's a USB-C charging cable, I think is kind of the question is, how do I differentiate that from a data one? You really have to plug it in to tell. So I would look first for the markings. Does it have a Thunderbolt bolt on it? Second, the plug end, is it kind of a long cable, like about an inch on the tip there, or the tip of the cable, or shorter? And if it has a 3 or 4, and if it's got a 3 and it's active, you may not be able to get any reasonable USB-C or USB rates over it, USB 3 rates, which could be 5 to 20 gigabits per second now. It may not pass USB 4 faster than 480 megabits per second, any of the USB flavors, even though it can carry Thunderbolt at the full data rate you're expecting. Joe, do you think I covered this? Did I do it
Yes.
comprehensively?
Let
What
me
else
let
is
me just
missing?
jump in here and ask a follow-up question. So let's suppose I have a cable in my hand and I have confirmed that whatever else it may do, it does charge because I experimentally plugged it into the wall, an adapter, and I plugged it into my device, and it's charging. So we know that it's good, it charges, but I'm not sure whether it will pass data, or if it will pass data, how fast it will go. Now, I guess I could try connecting two devices and see if data goes, like, connect a external hard drive or SSD or something and see if it even shows up at all. But but assuming that it does, the bigger question is, how can I easily tell what rate of data throughput I am getting from a given cable? Can I easily test that? And then I just like stick a little label on the cable that says, well, this cable is 480 megabits per second, or this cable is 20 gigabits per second, or whatever. How can I ascertain what kind of throughput that cable is capable of?
Well, oops, there we go. I think that brings me up. This is a great question. It's actually one of our listeners, viewers, has asked that as well. How do you test your cable? How do you know? And the answer is there's no good way to do it. The only way that you can test a cable is by plugging it between devices that you know what their capabilities are. So if you have a Thunderbolt 3 or 4 external drive, which I happen to have, I have a couple different ones for testing, and one that I use on my M1 Mac Mini, I can plug in something, that drive, to another device, a host like another computer, and then I can run a test program on the computer, like Black Magic, was it Black Disk Magic, Black Magic Disk, which is free software and lets you kind of stress test the read write speed of an attached drive. And I can see, am I getting speeds that I expect from the equipment, from the SSD or hard drive inside, over this connection? On a Mac, you can use system information. You hold down the option key, click the Apple button, and then choose system information. And you can click Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4, USB. It may vary in the sidebar on the left. And then you can look at the devices connected, and Apple's operating system will tell you the link speed that was negotiated. So it might be 5 or 10, 20, 40, and that will tell you. This is where you can often determine if you're only getting 480 megabits per second or USB 2.0 speed, or if the device is not even recognized. If you can't get it to mount, you'll see that it won't show up, or it'll give you some strange message there that can help in debugging. It's often, unless you know all the capabilities of your devices, it can be very hard to know whether whether you can connect them at the speed you want. And then you need to know the capabilities of the cable. So there used to be a lot of unmarked cables, or cables that were marked with USB symbols, and sometimes those cables could or couldn't deliver between like or unlike controllers. So you plug in a peripheral that should be able to do 10 gigabits per second, like an SSD, into your computer that should be able to do up 10 to 40 gigabits per second over the port, and you get 480 megabits per second. So in that case, it's often that you need a different cable as opposed to different hardware.
So what if you wanted to do this test definitively, you would have to own some sort of external device that is capable of the maximum possible speed, like a Thunderbolt 4 SSD, let's say. So you have to
Yes.
have some device that is capable of 40 gigabits per second throughput, and then you attach it with various cables, and you look in your example, if you have a Mac, in the system information, and see what rate your Mac has negotiated with that device, and that rate will tell you what that cable is capable of. But if you're connecting a device that itself is not capable of more than, let's say, 10 gigabits per second, then the test
Yeah.
is not definitive.
It's exactly that, because if you can't plug in something with that interface, you can't determine whether it can operate at that rate. A lot of people have asked about and I should just point out, we've got some questions that we're going to get to in just a second, and please keep asking your questions, because this is a Q&A. We could talk all day about our own stuff, but please ask your questions in the chat stream, and we'll keep getting to them. Yeah, so people have asked us a lot, is there a cable tester? Is there a way that I could just buy a piece of hardware that I could plug it in and it would light up green or blue or whatever and tell me a speed? And I have something like this. It's unfortunately no longer made. Satechi made a piece of equipment for measuring USB-C battery flow. So it's how I test USB-C battery packs and cables and other cords. I can see the amount of amperage and voltage and the watt and negotiated other data on this little tiny display. And you'd think, well, couldn't somebody create this? But to do a cable tester, you need two controllers. Each controller is like a module that's in a computer. If it's Thunderbolt, it's, I think, still only sold by Intel. USB controllers are sold by lots of companies, but you essentially have to build two small computers that their entire purpose of which was negotiating a rate, and then have a device, that with a display. And that's not impossible. You can get these in the industry, but I think the consumer demand for them is so small that there's an assumption no one would pay, $300 or $800 for a device like this, whatever it might cost. So I think you can go out and spend thousands of dollars to get a cable tester, maybe less, but I haven't seen one for that price. But yeah, you're stuck with having devices you own, trying to use equipment, a software on your equipment, on your host computer. And if you're using a mobile device, it may not give you the feedback you need either, because it may not display data rates.
Or here's an idea. You could mail your cable to Glenn with, let's say, a
Yes.
$50 bill, and he would plug it in and do the testing for you and say, it's a charging only cable.
It's yeah, absolutely. This will be the it's like the drug testing services to see if the drugs have been corrupted. You just send me your cable and a bill and an anonymous phone. You call an anonymous phone number. I tell you if the cable is good or bad.
Now,
We have another.
Kim Hallberg in the comments
Yes.
had a really interesting question.
Yes. Okay.
Kim has a USB SSD that connects with a USB-C to USB-A adapter, and depending on which way the USB-C plug is inserted, the bandwidth is different, which is like, what could be going on there?
I have an answer for this. I know, isn't this so? I'm going to digress very briefly. As once after I graduated college, I was studying graphic design, and my former design professor calls me up and says, "I was told you're the only person in the world with the answer to this question." It was an obscure Cyrillic font question, and in fact, I was one of possibly 20 people in the world who had the answer. I was able to fulfill my old design professor's dream. Well, Kim, you're in luck. I'm one of the few people, I think, who will talk to human beings, as opposed to engineers working in labs, about this. USB-C comes in, older and newer cable versions too. And one of the advances between 3.1. So let me back up slightly. I don't want to give you crazy. You can find all this if you're really interested. It's in my book. We cover, should just remind people, you go to takecontrolbooks.com/untangling to get a book that explains all this in depth with figures and step by step. Just $5 for the next couple days through May 5th. Got to throw the ad in there for this. But so USB 3.0 was a huge advance, 5 gigabits per second, but it required a type A, the rectangular style connection. And because I have visual aids, so let me just make sure, this is a type A connector. We all are very familiar. We're all very familiar with it, even if it won't focus. It's really doesn't want to focus, but it's that rectangular connector that was the host connector. And on the other end, you'd have some other kind of thing like, wait, I've got the cable. I have a cable for everything now. So you'd have, say, this USB type B, this USB 3 type B connector. Here, I'm going to switch for one moment to the cable cam so I can show you that. And the USB 3 connector, I don't know if everyone's seen one of these. This was a little oddball. It's a type B. Maybe you have. They were very popular before USB-C started to take over. So I have a few cables like this, and have, I think, 1 or 2 hard drives that still use this connector. So you've got what appears to be normal USB type A on one end, but you see this cable is properly labeled with blue, so you know it's USB 3, even though the other end is not labeled with blue. It's just normal. And so you could use that for 5 gigabits per second in a normal situation, right? You just plug that in, great. USB 3.1 came in Gen 1 and Gen 2 versions, and that was the first appearance of USB-C. So that gave us the option for 10 gigabits per second when you used USB-C on both ends of the connection. But you could also still use USB-C to type A and get lower speeds, but still 5 gigabits per second. USB-C USB 3.2 actually has 4 variations, even though they're called Gen 1 and Gen 2. There's different configurations. So this gets a little technical, but it answers Kim's question. Is with a 3.1 cable, the cables have orientation that works in either direction, right? You can rotate it and you'll get up to 10 gigabits per second. So you plug in a USB-C cable on one side to a controller, you plug it into a hard drive on the other side, Doesn't matter which way the orientation is of either end, you'll always get 10 gigabits per second. What I think is going on is that USB 3.2 cables, there was a change in the electrical standard that allowed more data to flow by using what were the reversible pins in the cable, which were dedicated to a purpose in the 3.1 standard. They can now all be used at once. So my suspicion is that either the controller has a particular limitation or you're using a 3.1 cable with a 3.2 controller and it's not registering it correctly. And that if you got a USB 4 cable or one that was marked USB 3.2, I suspect this would go away. Now, the other problem, it might be the USB-C to USB A adapter. So that's, one of, I have a zillion of these. It may actually not be electrically set up for 3.2 either. And I'm not sure it's possible. And maybe that you're not be able to get an adapter like this that's electrically correct for USB 3.2 right now. And that could be the problem. But so USB 3.2 has essentially 4 streams, and a type A connector can do 1 or 2 of those streams. So it can do 5 or 10. The USB-C connector can do, I believe it's 2 or 4 streams and get 10 or 20 gigabits per second. So these are the little tweaks that we wind up with incompatibilities, but you only notice in high performance devices. So an SSD or a RAID is always going to be the thing that reveals to you there's a problem, because you're trying to get, I don't know, 2 gigabits per second or 7 gigabits per second or something. And you say, I'm not hitting that. I'm only getting, I'm being limited to a substantially smaller number. I'm sorry, 2 gigabytes per second or 7 gigabytes per second, the drive rates, because you're not able to, wait, am I using those units correctly, Joe? Help me here. If you have a 40 gigabit, so you can have a 40 gigabit per second connection and be using an SSD that can produce, almost hit that limit. It can do like 35 gigabits per second of data transfer. So you plug that in and you wind up saying, well, I'm not getting this speed. I'm getting a speed that's a quarter that or much slower. And that's how a lot of people discover that the cable they have won't pass faster than USB 2.0 speeds, even though it has USB-C on one or both ends, because there's a limit in the cable or in the controllers, but typically the cable, that's preventing it from bumping up to at least USB 3.0 with type A, USB 3.1 with USB-C, or a Thunderbolt standard. I think Kim, did we answer that question? You can ask follow-ups. Do we have, and I think we may have some more questions coming in too.
While
Please
we're
keep
waiting,
asking questions if you got
let me
them.
go back to an earlier question that
Yes.
we slightly glossed over, which is how do you label cables? And I'm going to let you answer this, but then I would like to add one thought of my own. But go ahead.
Yes. Oh, well, I'm going to be really honest. I don't label cables. What I do is I get rid of cables that don't meet my specifications. I give them away, or I don't, I mean, there's cable recycling places. I'm in Seattle and we have an e-waste outfit that attempts to reuse everything they get. So when you donate to them, they will take e-waste and they have responsible pathways, that have been certified to take e-waste. But if it's a working cable, they'll check, before they throw it away, or not throw it away, but put it in the stream. And so I'm hoping my cables are getting reused that way. I've been shifting slowly to cables that I know the capabilities, and I'm trying to only buy cables that have markings on the end. So if I buy a cable that I want to use in a USB only scenario, I'm going to buy one that has USB super speed plus or USB-C or USB super speed 10. I mean, the USB working group, or the implementers forum, the group that sets the standards. I talk about this in the book, but it's also a little irritating for all of us. We were just talking today, Joe and I, because the 240-watt cable standard is out from the USB IF, and the first cable has been advertised that supports it. But you might be able to get, Joe and I were talking about this, a cable that can do 240 watts of charging, so far above the 100-watt limit in the current USB, or the sort of general USB power delivery standard that's out there now. But it might only pass 480 megabits per second of data. Who wants that? Nobody wants that. But it might be used because of affordability by manufacturers who want to put out a high wattage cable. So I'm sorry, to Joe, my answer is I want markings on the cables, and I don't want to mark them myself. And I know Adam Engst, he uses some kind of labeling device or a tagging system. What's your solution for that?
So I bought a package of sheets of laser printer cable labels. Say that 10 times fast. And
Just being
they're
presumptive.
like
It's either dip or down.
plasticized. They're not just plain paper. They're sort of plasticky so that they don't just rip off. But they're sort of, you know, bigger on the ends and then littler in the middle. And you print whatever you want on your laser printer on both sides of this, and then you wrap it around the cable, and then it sticks to itself. So of course, you're gonna, whatever you print on this, you can print whatever you want. You're gonna have to print it really, really tiny. And so, you know, I'm like, okay, drag out the reading glasses. Um, the most, if you're labeling USB-C / Thunderbolt cables, the most important things to say are like, what is the throughput and can it charge? Like those are the two things, and you can test that in the aforementioned ways. There is another piece of information that I like to have on my cables, and this might be something you would put on the reverse side, which is what is connected to the other end. So if let's say I'm looking at the back of my computer and there's like 8 cables sticking out of it. I'm like, okay, I want to unplug that thing, but I want to be sure I don't unplug the wrong thing. You know, it's the same way with my TV, like all of the places where like I have one device with a lot of things coming out of it, and then they all like go back behind a table or counter or desk, and then they go to different directions. It, to me, it's useful to know, to just jot, just like, you know, this connects to my Apple TV, this connects to my hard drive, this connects to whatever, so that I can tell from the other end what's on that. So that's just my free little bonus tip.
I think that's great. I mean, I think that's something those of us who've been around the block a few thousand times, previous generations of cables were incredibly irritating. And sometimes you'd have multiple identical cables that had different purposes, and some you'd think would plug in and they wouldn't. And then you'd bend the pins on them because they had extra pins. You know, if I'm thinking of the DIN plugs used with Apple Talk and Serial,
Okay.
for instance. You know, Kim had another there's some other questions here too, but I just want to follow up with Kim because USB-C. So Kim said, I see a USB-C and thought it reversible. This is actually more annoying than if it was a Type A connection all the way. And as we know, Type A cables, you have to rotate 3 times to get them to fit. They're non-geometrically sound in our universe. And you know, it sounds like a joke. We all know it's a joke. And yet I have recently had to rotate a cable 3 times to get it to fit. But USB-C is really reversible. I think the case you're hitting, as I think about it more precisely, I think it's a design issue and a labeling issue on the USB-C to USB Type A adapter, that in fact it's not a standards issue in this case. It's an issue with even though there's labeling requirements and useful things for labeling, I think this generational thing plus an adapter puts you in a really weird spot. And in fact, I'd never heard of this situation before, but the minute you said it, I'm like, oh, it's the reversible pins problem, as if that was a standard thing, because it's the only thing that makes sense is that pins that would be expected, quote unquote, to deliver data are not delivering data. So it's a little idiosyncratic, but I'm going to have to add it to my list. I have the 3 cables you should watch out for. Now I have like 3 cables plus an adapter. And you know, so active Thunderbolt 3 might not deliver the USB speeds you want over USB-C. A USB 3 only cable might not deliver the Thunderbolt speeds you want, especially for SSD. A USB-C charge cable might deliver no data. Some don't even pass any data, or might deliver only USB 2 speeds. There's another. So then this adapter, the reversible adapter that's not fully reversible. There's one more situation, which is you can have so Thunderbolt has a peer-to-peer mode, and I think Apple is using this. I'm trying to still figure this out. There's a peer-to-peer mode in Thunderbolt so that 2 host devices can create essentially a daisy-chained LAN, and at 10 gigabits per second. And so when Apple offers, for instance, Migration Assistant, one of the options is you plug a Thunderbolt cable between 2 Macs with Thunderbolt built in, 3 or 4. And hey, Bob's your uncle, you get very high data rates if it all works out. Well, if you have a USB 3 only cable, so it's a USB-C cable, and you plug it between 2 Thunderbolt ports, you should be able to get USB 3 speeds because the ports will be backwards compatible. But you can't get this peer-to-peer mode because the peer-to-peer mode typically requires a mode within Thunderbolt. But on some devices, now to make it more complicated, some computers will also support a USB-C Ethernet mode. And if they support that, they might create an Ethernet style connection as if you plugged an Ethernet cable in, but it may again not work between hosts. So just to make things more or less confusing. Also, Ward in the chat, or the conversation here, I guess it's a chat, says that uses plastic clips from bread bags, which I think is great. Those are usually big enough to snap over the cable, and they don't come loose. Those bread tags. Great tip.
Okay, before it scrolls off my screen here,
Oh yeah.
Spike asked several minutes ago,
Oh
can you
yes. I'm
recommend a
sorry.
few drives for the different connections, and are there drives with multiple connections?
I am trying to remember, Joe. Have you seen any that do both USB? See, I don't think I've seen a USB, say, USB 3 type B, which is that, just to remind everybody, I've got it here somewhere, that wide connector. Yeah,
Yeah.
this weird, I mean, seemingly weird wide connector. Yeah. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's USB 2.0.
No, no, no.
That's
Sorry. I
USB
picked up the wrong cable. This is USB
USB, right.
USB B here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
USB 3 type B,
Yeah.
with that interesting cable end. So I don't believe I've seen a drive with that, uh, which would allow it to do 5 gigabits per second, because that's USB 3.0 standard, and one with a Thunderbolt controller as well. I think the cost of building both adapters in is too high, and Thunderbolt 3 is backwards compatible with USB. It has a requirement, I think, up to 5, maybe 10 gigabits per second. USB 4 has a compatibility requirement with Thunderbolt 4 must do 10 gigabits per second. So all the controllers have to support that for USB 3.1 and 3.2. And Thunderbolt 4 also requires USB 4 compatibility. So I think that's the word they use. There's like a word about it. One is compatibility and one is something else, not coexistence. But it means that if USB 4 data goes over the cable, then it has to be able to support it at USB 4 speeds. But the Thunderbolt 4 controllers don't have to support it. So, but all in all, that means, like, if you are a drive maker and you're like, what's the fastest, most compatible standard I can put in? If you're have a lower end SSD, you might put in, you might not even worry about it. You put in like, I have a SATA interface, SATA interface, inexpensive SSD I use for my photos library storage on my Mac. And I think I spent a little over $100 for it. Now it only performs about 10 or 20 times faster than a hard drive. So it doesn't need faster than 5 gigabits per second. So it only has a USB 3 type B connector on it. Now, the SSD I'm using to boot my machine, that's a Thunderbolt 3 device. I bought it before Thunderbolt 4, and it only has a USB-C port on it, and it has a Thunderbolt controller in it. So if I plug it into a USB 3 only computer, it's only going to hit 10 gigabits per second. But but that's okay because it's backwards compatible. But the drive could outperform a 10 gigabit per second connection. So I need Thunderbolt for the speed of that drive. So I guess the answer is, I think it's unlikely that a drive maker is going to put in multiple interfaces, because it doesn't, or a peripheral maker, because it typically doesn't serve the purposes of the equipment they're making. Joe, I'm sorry, do you have a comment about that?
No, that's correct. I think if you see a drive that has, let's say, a USB-C connector on it, and we're not going to specify at the moment whether it's USB 4 or USB 3 or Thunderbolt or whatever, it's only going to have that one connector. I have never seen anything with both a USB C connector and one of these that I incorrectly held up a minute ago, like one of these things. So the only question is, what is the highest standard that this device supports? Because they're all backwards compatible. They're forward compatible too. It's just that you don't get the additional speed. So long story short, if you want maximum speed and maximum compatibility, look for at least USB 4 and or Thunderbolt 4. If you can't get that, look for Thunderbolt 3. But
yeah, it's a tricky question. I mean, Spike, I think it's a great one to ask, and I think the answer is, this is what we keep coming back to, is the USB. It's the 4.0 cable here. I'll hold it up. I've got a really long one here too. Is USB 4 Thunderbolt 4 cables. If I can, it's tangled up. Again, the clue is the 4 and the lightning bolt. Confusingly, by the way, this cracked me up when I figured it out. So Apple has a lightning standard, right? The lightning standard, not related to Thunderbolt or lightning. There's no markings. This is a USB-C to lightning cable, Apple never released a symbol for lightning. And so it's not a lightning bolt or a thunderbolt. And this cable from Apple is designed to connect an iPhone or iPad with lightning to a USB-C device, right? It's a native cable, but holy cow, it's not labeled at all. So what information are you supposed to use for that?
So,
Uh,
so I just want to say, Glenn, Spike chimed in and said on vintage Macs, I used Voyager's Qs because they had all the
oh,
connections. Now, of course, so I'm like trying to Google one of these things to call up the list of what connections they had, and of course, when you type Voyager Q into a search bar, you get all the things about the John Delancey character on Star Trek. So just that's interesting.
uh, and just in the interest of my personal brand, I spent a week at sea with John Delancey once, and I can't comment on that at all. So moving on, the Voyager Q is a fantastic device, eSATA, USB 3.0, FireWire 400, and FireWire 800. Now, this is a fantastic transition device. I didn't know it existed, but I think that's oh, I'm sorry, that port I keep calling USB 3 type B. It's USB 3 micro B, type micro B, not full size. But because I think all USB 3 full size. I mean, this is one of the funny parts I found, and tell me if everyone's geeky enough to think this is funny, that USB, um, if you look at Wikipedia on the USB cable types thing, there's this great chart that shows like how all the different cable types, so type A, micro type B, micro 3 type, whatever, all of those are along the top, and then compatibility of the same ones down. And it's like, don't do this. Like type A never went to type A. It was actually dangerous. You could rig up a cable and perhaps blow up your computer, I guess. It was just like, I mean, there's red labels or pinkish labels in Wikipedia. USB-C is the first cable that you can put on, first USB-C cable, I should say, or first USB and Thunderbolt cable that you can use the same on both ends. You don't have to worry about this. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's not right. Thunderbolt had the same advantage. It was universal, but it wasn't a universal connector, was not reversible, and and it wouldn't work with USB, right? And so now we have a universal cable that's reversible, that you don't have to worry about which end you plug in, and that's a fantastic advantage. But this whole thing about I think the Voyager Q is an amazing device when we were sorting out like what the future was going to be. FireWire hadn't kept up, USB 3 had made a leap, and eSATA seemed like a real option in the mix there. And then it's all kind of blended away into USB-C based standards. So now USB 3.1, 3.2, 4, and Thunderbolt 3 and 4 have really won the day. I mean, I haven't seen FireWire equipment for years, but I was always big. FireWire had a lot of advantages in its day, and they just never came out with a viable FireWire, 10,000 or whatever they'd have to call it.
David made a really apt comment, which is that there are a lot of out of spec cables and adapters out there.
Yes.
And even though the standards say this should be able to do this, and you get a cable that advertises itself as being able to do this and that, it might have been manufactured poorly or cheaply, and it might not do that. Do you have any advice for either avoiding out of spec cables and adapters, or finding out whether something that you have might be out of spec?
Yeah, this is a problem, and it came out in the early days of USB-C, which was 2015, which is hard to believe. So we're 7 years into the revolution, and we're still wrestling with this. And Benson Leong at Google, who's part of the Pixel team, I think it was a group he was on, he independently of Google, like not under their company, cachet, tested lots of cables because they were finding problems, and posted his results, posted interviews on Amazon, or interviews, sorry, reviews on Amazon, and a lot of information. And then I noticed after a few years, he sort of dropped out of doing that because most USB-C cables that were the cables that were selling best were no longer terrible. And so I'm sure there's still a lot of compliance ones out there. And if you bought one a few years ago, it's possible it has issues. I mean, what I tell people, and I hate to say this, is I think you have to look at not just reviews, but brand names. So I always recommend Otherworld Computing, not because there's no financial arrangement, I should point out, but also, and there are other companies. There's Belkin, there's Anker, there's ANKER. other firms that I trust as well, because I've owned a lot of their products. They've been consistent over time. Satechi, own various docks from them, CalDigit. These various companies make a lot of different USB-C and USB-C, Thunderbolt products with varying interactions. And I just, when OWC, Other World Computing, announced that they had affordable Thunderbolt 4/USB 4 cables, I was like, great, I'm going to buy a couple of those. I bought the short one that's like 0.8 feet, I think, and the long one, which is 6.6 feet, 3 meters, I believe. And $27 and $59 at the time, something like that. And now I have cables I can use in every circumstance. And I don't need that many cables. I'm not testing or plugging in that much, but I have these cables and I know their capabilities and they're well marked. So boy, I think I think we're in a weird time where I want to say, because I hate to say go brand name, because then you're saying, well, these startups and other companies that are making perfectly good generic products or products with brand names you don't know, or sorry, names you don't know, that aren't like, top brands in their field, should we ignore them? And it's like, no, but for something like this, it's so critical. And we know that reviews at Amazon can be easily faked. There are essentially sweatshops full of people. You've seen pictures of, there's 300 iPhones or 1,000 iPhones, and they just walk around and tap and have wired them all and jailbroken many of them so they can submit mass reviews in a way that doesn't trigger Amazon's fraud algorithms. So, I also go to FakeSpot and Review Meta if you're actually really considering stuff. If there's enough reviews of a product, more than a handful, including cables and adapters, you can go to those sites and they will do some analysis. I don't know how fantastic it is, but it does seem to call out patterns and problems. So you might be able to see that, well, they think all these reviews were faked, or, hey, these are all, A+ reviews. They're from real people who reviewed multiple things at Amazon. They've been on for a while and they're marked as verified purchase. So that can be a help as well. I don't think there's a real good guide, and we certainly didn't publish one to say, here are the 50 USB-C cables you can trust. But I think there's a good 7 or 8 manufacturers out there that I wouldn't worry about, because they produce quality work and I've owned their cables and hardware, and think that there's nothing to worry about with them. And if there is a problem, they will take care of it under warranty. Also, we're still, we haven't set an end time for this. We'll probably be wrapping up soon, but if anybody has additional questions, or if we haven't answered your question, give us a punch out here on the the chat, so we can come and make sure we do answer your question if we've missed it. And Joe, I don't know if you have any questions. If we haven't,
I'm just going to this is a little bit random, but I'm going to attempt to hold up 3 cables here. Let me see if I
spotlighting you. There we go. You're on camera.
Device is in the right place. All right. So here, hopefully this will show up. This is, I think, a micro USB. What is?
It's a micro. It's I think it is micro type B, if I'm remembering right.
Okay, all right. Next we have, this is just for comparison, this is USB-C, okay, the one we all know and hopefully love. And then I have this one that is smaller than USB-C.
Yes.
And I literally just found this in a drawer. It's a flat cable and it has USB-A on the other end. And I have owned so many weird devices over the years that have proprietary connectors, and I have no idea what this is. So
hold that up again, because I think that, what's funny is I believe that is actually a kind of type B, micro type B, I think.
I can't get it quite in focus, unfortunately, but it's
see, because I've got one just like that, and
it looks like, yes, it looks like
yeah, and I believe it's actually a differently colored version of the same thing, because if I find another micro type B, let's see, so this is that weird like maybe it's mini type B. People will correct us. I think it's mini type B. That's the weird one you found, where this was Kindle. The original Kindle used this. So if you have an old Kindle cable, that's that. So we keep a few of those around. This one is, I must have, I think this is actually, as weird as it looks, I think it's standard. Because if so here's the problem. I'm finding another one just like this. Oops, if I can get it out to show. So here, I'll bring this, let me see. Let's put focus on, do that. And you can see these two. Let's get these both in the camera view. You can see these look like they're different, but they're actually the same. Oops, that's my brain is sorry, my left right brain is not working. There we go. So you see how those seem like they're different? I
Uh-huh.
think they're actually the same cable. Uh, and so that is what I think is the case. Or the same connector. Oops, I'm trying to get that in focus. Yeah, so you see the shape is identical, the inner side is identical, but you look at them and think, wait, these can't be the same at all. And but I think they are actually compatible. Um, so wow, I'm gonna come back to our spaces here for a minute. We're
Yeah.
gonna a few more questions here. We should let me
Yes, somebody is asking, Jim Thing is asking about optical Thunderbolt 4 cables. Do they exist? Are they any
uh
good?
yes. I don't know if they're any good because I don't got that kind of money, folks. This book business is rough and I don't have that sort of money. No, I'm not exaggerating, but I think Corning is making a $300 cable. I mean, Thunderbolt originally was supposed to be what was it, not Light Source, I'm forgetting the original name. It had a great name, and changed it to Thunderbolt, and it was originally going to require a optical cable because they didn't think they could carry enough data over copper. And then through great engineering work, they managed to get 10 gigabits per second, and now up to 40, which is, I think, an incredible feat in just a matter of gosh, is it under a decade since Thunderbolt was introduced? I think that's right. And so it outstripped USB for years, and it outstripped Firewire at its introduction. So, yay to Intel and Apple and other engineers who contributed to that. But so optical has always been there kind of in the background. And my recollection is you could get Thunderbolt optical cables. They were just very expensive. So they were useful for very limited purposes. They don't carry USB, they don't carry power, and they don't carry video, I think, either. I don't think you could encapsulate DisplayPort inside an optical Thunderbolt cable, if I'm remembering so correctly. So I know there have been announcements of fairly expensive, like 10 times as much cost if you need a greater distance. And Intel, at its Thunderbolt 4 announcement, part of what they said is we really want longer cables, greater than 2 meters. 2 meters is kind of the effective copper limit. That gets you 6.6 feet, 2 meters. So they want cables that could be 5 to 50 meters, and that's a goal, and that can be achieved. I don't know if, I'm sorry, Jim in the chat notes, Corning's is a Thunderbolt 3 cable. I'm not sure if that matters in this standpoint because Thunderbolt 4 has a lot of extras or things that were optional in Thunderbolt 3 and are required in Thunderbolt 4, like being using external hubs, allowing Thunderbolt 4 Thunderbolt hubs. Some Thunderbolt 3 controllers can do it. Apple released an update in Big Sur that enabled that for older devices with Thunderbolt 3, so you could support an external Thunderbolt hub. Thunderbolt 4 requires it. So things like that would not be supported by a Thunderbolt 3 optical cable, but I don't think you'd use it for that purpose, or multiple displays. Thunderbolt 4 requires 2 4K displays to be supported, which can be supported within that minimum 40 gigabits per second bandwidth, which is also a requirement. So I think that answers that question. Oh, I'm getting some feedback here. Mini B, yeah. So Mini B, it's not HDMI though. I've got a micro. Wait a second. I've got, like I said, we have every cable here. I've got a. This is. I'll just show it here. This is mini HDMI, and I've actually got a micro HDMI somewhere else as well. We have every cable in this shop, and then here's the old the mini DisplayPort, which was also used for. Let's see if I get it. Focus. I'll put my hand behind it. Usually does better. Camera doesn't want to do it. So DisplayPort style cable, DisplayPort, mini DisplayPort rather, and the original Thunderbolt 1 and 2 format. And in this case, it's on the other end of a DisplayPort cable because it's actually mini DisplayPort to regular full-size DisplayPort. And David in the chat notes, there's nothing wrong with using a Thunderbolt 3 optical cable. And that's correct. I mean, if what you're looking for is 40 gigabits per second over long distances, and some, as I recall, and Joe, I don't know if this is your gig, if this has come up in your travels, audio studios used to have a huge issue with cabling because they want to have all the hard drives in another room, all the noisy stuff elsewhere. And they might want like 20, 40 even 100 feet of cabling, and Firewire, excuse me, Firewire 800 and then 1600 and 3200 were supposed to provide those options. And I think that's one of the main reasons I'm aware of for wanting very long Thunderbolt cables that are optical,
Yes.
because right, you don't get interference because they're optical, so you have no crosstalk or other wiring stuff, and you can have a studio that's very far away.
We could have a whole other discussion about audio. My brother-in-law is an audio engineer. We could get Jeff
My brother-in-law
Duncan.
is an audio engineer. Are they
Wow,
the same person?
smart.
No, probably not.
Anyway, we get Jeff Duncan in here, who has a lot of things to say about audio.
Yes.
But yeah, I think you're right that is one of the driving things, needing to isolate, sound from different rooms, and not wanting to have vibrations, get from one place to another. That's certainly a factor. And boy, we're not even talking about like analog audio here. We're just talking about using digital cables for audio. Boy, that opens up a whole can of worms. At some point, way back in the discussion, I forget, you said something about somebody, maybe one of your kids asked you, is this a MIDI cable?
Oh
and
my God, yes.
there are MIDI devices that have a USB port that is designed to transmit MIDI data, and like instead of, or in addition to, an actual like 5-pin round DIN plug, they can use a USB port as a MIDI interface for your, to connect to your computer or whatever. So boy, talking about those whole worlds, fascinating, and I would love to, but probably out of scope for today.
I'm going to take over the screen here for a second, because I'm going to show the Wikipedia page just briefly. It's this chart that's this is, if you want to see all the horror that is, right? And we were looking at, I'm pretty sure we had micro B. Those are both micro B expressed in different ways, USB 2.0 micro B. But you can see, and then the mini, what was it? The mini, was it mini B? What's the weird Amazon one? I think it's the, I think that might be mini B, with that slightly not. And then this B, this bizarre full size B that's in U-point. And I've seen a little bit of that, but it didn't wind up having major adoption. And then this is the chart. If I can scroll down, I'll find the, you see all these pinout issues. This all gets very technical, but this is the one that is, I find, terrifying. It's, here's all your port types across the top. And then here's all the same ones along this side. And it's like, yes, only supported this way. No, 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 no. Deprecated. And then there's another chart. Here it is. This is the great one. It's cable table, proprietary, hazardous. It's like, no, you look at USB-C, it's like, yes, no, yes. And here it's like, don't do it. Stop. You're a maniac. Anyway, I'll return us to our regular scheduled program. I have an anecdote I'll tell briefly. Joe heard this one already, which is just last night. Of course, I'm talking cables with my kids as we do. My older kid needs a MIDI cable because he's got a device, he's got a keyboard he wants to connect that's essentially a MIDI controller. And he says, well, I don't think it has whatever. And he says, well, isn't this a MIDI port, a MIDI connector? And he pulls out a cable from a keyboard we have at home, and it's USB type B. And I said, oh, that's just type B. And they said, he and my 15-year-olds say, wait, what's type B? And they're, my kids, they're a little geeky. They know what C is and A and all these other things. And I said, wait, you don't know what type B is? And my wife's sitting there, and I'm like, Lynn, you remember this? She's like, everything had type B on it. I mean, she didn't necessarily say type B, but we all know. And I said, it's what you use to connect peripherals. And they said, what's a peripheral? Which is like a punchline. I'm like, oh my God, like scanners, hard drives, scanners, right? Printers, all the printers now are wireless. Nobody uses a scanner. If you plug in a hard drive, it's not thought of as a peripheral. Maybe it's not characterized that way. Anyway, I thought that was the ultimate, not revenge, but it was a pretty cute thing for the author of a book called Take Control of Untangling Connections. What's that? You can get that for the next couple days at takecontrolbooks.com/untangling, though perhaps all of our viewers already have it. But future viewers watching the replay, that's where you get the book.
Since,
I think we're about to
just about coming up to an hour. There is one question that we have not addressed yet.
Oh yes,
and
I see that.
I don't think it has an answer, but I'll just, so Jim asks, how come Apple can do a Pro Thunderbolt 4 cable at 3 meters, but no one else can? They stop at 2 meters.
I have this same question. So if you find out, let me know. I think there's some give and take, right? Now, standards are, you're trying to achieve a certain kind of result. You're not trying to do a best effort with most standards that have if you're trying to get 40 gigabits per second, it needs to deliver it under all testing circumstances. There shouldn't be edge cases that people can encounter. So my presumption is Apple figured out a way to mess with the electrical characteristics enough that within the constraints of Thunderbolt 4 and providing a universal Thunderbolt 4 cable, which means it cannot have active components in the cable plugins that provide additional signaling support. So within the constraints of a universal cable, Apple figured out a way to get the reliability and consistency they needed and go further than most other cables. But it's kind of like overclocking a chip, twiddling with your car's engine rev and other characteristics. I'm not a car person, as you can tell, and trying to come up with something that produces better performance, but you're pushing the limits. So I have not heard how Apple did it. I don't know if it's a big deal or not. And it may be that Intel and Apple works very closely with Intel and Thunderbolt and helps, we don't know to the extent to which, but it's deeply involved clearly in keeping it as an active and vibrant standard. So it's possible Intel will come out with an announcement. Hey, we've released a spec for 3-meter cables and 5-meter cables over copper, and they'll look like this, and they'll have a symbol, and it'll say 4 plus copper extension. It'll have 3 new iconography elements and whatever else on it. But yeah, so I don't know, and it's a great question. David in the chat says Apple's cable is active, isn't it? Well, if it's active, it doesn't qualify as a Thunderbolt 4 cable. So if they're labeling it as Thunderbolt 4 and it's an active cable, so it has additional circuitry, it must be able to carry USB. It must be able to pass USB 4 traffic at up to 40 gigabits per second, and it must be capable of backwards compatibility between 2 Thunderbolt 4 or 3, I believe, controllers at 10 gigabits per second for USB 3.1 or 3.2. So if Apple's cable is active and it only does 480 megabits per second of USB speed, then it should not be called a Thunderbolt 4 cable.
I
So
am
there may
looking
be
at
some wiggle
Apple's
room in there.
product page right now for
Yeah.
their new Thunderbolt 4 Pro cable, 3 meters, $159.
$159. Holy cow.
Geez. It does not, I do not see the word active on this page. It does say up to 40 gigabits per second, but USB 3.1 Gen 2 data transfer at up to 10 gigabits per second because,
yeah, so if it's active, then Apple is doing some magic there, or this is the funny thing. I spent a lot of time reading the Intel specs on Thunderbolt, going through their presentations, and what they say is they don't say that the Thunderbolt 4 cable is not active. What they say is it's universal. There's no longer a need for an active cable. There's no longer a distinction between passive and active for Thunderbolt 4 cables. But I've found Thunderbolt 4 cables advertised as active in a few cases, and I don't know what the differentiation is. Like, as I say, if I pull over, we've got these 2 cables right here that I was showing earlier. I've got this one's from Cable Matters, right? And I've got one from, oops, if I can pull it free. I've got this one, sorry, making a lot of cracking noises here. I've got these 2 cables, right? And we look at the ends of them, and I'll put my hand behind it so they'll focus. And you see one says 3, one says 4. The 3 is absolutely an active cable. It's nearly twice as long, so the extra circuitry in it, than the 4. So either the circuitry is miniaturized and no longer requires the same electrical headroom or whatever for the Thunderbolt 4 cables, or it's no longer active, or they've redefined it, or there's a new Thunderbolt 4 cable head end chips they're using or something. But I wish, it's the kind of thing you're like, why couldn't Intel make a clear statement, or Apple make a clear statement? Both of them say this is the characteristics of it. So the best thing we have is Intel's statement in a presentation where they very clearly say a Thunderbolt 4 cable has to be universal, has to support 10 gigabit per second USB 3 rates, and must pass USB 4 rates at up to the maximum. So if you have a Thunderbolt 4 cable and it doesn't do that, it's technically not really a Thunderbolt 4 cable.
And you want to know what adds insult to injury is that cable, that $160 Apple Thunderbolt 4 Pro cable, does not have a number 4 on the end.
Oh, come on.
It has the lightning bolt symbol, but it does not have the number 4. So you'd think for $160 they could afford to print a number 4 on the cable.
It is, so this is where we come down to. I think we're oh, and here's Jim's points out in the chat. Yeah, this is right. So Cable Matters and CalDigit, their longer Thunderbolt 4 cables, they're greater than 2-meter cables, have active on the packaging. But I don't know what that means. If it, to me, if I'm reading the spec right, Thunderbolt 4, if it's active, it has to have that USB 3 and 4 support. So maybe it's a different kind of active, but then why doesn't Intel just make that clear? Well, I think we finished up our hour here. Reminder to everybody, I can let Joe do a pitch for Take Control Books. We got, was it 20 plus books for your anniversary sale?
21 out of our 61 current titles are on sale for $5 each. Now, this is only, because you might be watching this recording later, this is only through the end of May 5th, 2022. But if you happen to be watching by that time, go buy cheap books. And if you happen to be watching after that time, go buy very slightly more expensive books.
I'll help do the marketing job here, which is you can always get a 30% discount if you buy 3 or more books at once. Yep. At takecontrolbooks.com. My book is at takecontrolbooks.com/untangling. You can also go to that address /catalog and see the whole catalog of titles available. I have 10 active books, Joe. I have 10 active books. We're about to add an 11th. And boy, I appreciate everyone coming to talk cables. I know this is real exciting stuff, but it's the most frustrating thing I think that people encounter. The reason I wrote the book and the reason Joe said, hey, yeah, we should do a book on this, is that it's a pain point, and our job is removing pain points. And on the frustration, I didn't show, I should have brought up, but I thought it was too much of a body horror style thing. All the USB logos, and Intel actually kind of makes fun of them. If you go to Intel's Thunderbolt 4 presentation, they do a very nice job of taking the piss, as they say in England, out of the USB standards. Even as they're saying, oh, we support them all now, they're like, they show all the different iconography. And the worst thing you can do is to critique USB is to show all the iconography. And there's even a display port. I didn't even know this before researching the book. There's a display port icon you can put on a USB cable. We'll have 240 watt cables with, it's just USB didn't figure it out. They didn't understand what the implementers forum, I think, approached it from a very technical standpoint instead of a user standpoint. And Intel said, we're going to have one standard, one symbol, one number, because that will help us achieve our goals, our hegemony. And now with this weird convergence, the intertwingling of USB and Thunderbolt, I don't know what the next generation brings, but it may be that Thunderbolt's simplicity helps win out. I don't know. There's probably a cost issue in there too. Anyway, thank you all for coming to our untangled talk.